establishing central control immediately. This pawn thrust opens diagonals for both king and queen while aiming to restrict black's pieces. Instantly contesting the center and establishing symmetry, this counter-thrust immediately signals an intention for a solid, principled struggle for central control. Challenging black's central pawn creates immediate central tension, inviting a fight for control. Solidifying the center and preparing for queenside expansion, this choice aims to establish a robust pawn chain against white's ambitious gambit. Developing the knight to c3 solidifies central influence and prepares for potential queenside expansion or piece activity. Developing the knight to its natural outpost prepares for central pawn advances and reinforces the queenside's defensive structure. Solidifying the center, white chooses a steady path, prioritizing pawn structure over immediate piece activity. Embracing a fianchetto signals a commitment to queenside pressure and a flexible kingside defense. Developing the knight solidifies control of the center and prepares kingside castling, anticipating black's fianchetto. The bishop now eyes the central squares and prepares for kingside castling, a natural development given the pawn structure. Developing the bishop here solidifies the pawn structure and prepares for kingside castling, while potentially eyeing weakened squares in black's camp. Securing the monarch's safety against an anticipated kingside pawn storm becomes paramount, a sensible defensive maneuver. Castling offers the king immediate safety while preparing for central pawn breaks. Preparing to fianchetto the queen's bishop, aiming to contest the long diagonal and potentially challenge white's central pawn structure later. Preparing to expand on the queenside, this anchors the pawn structure and opens avenues for piece development. Developing the bishop to an active diagonal, this piece prepares to exert pressure along the queenside and supports potential pawn advances. Exposing the queen, this bishop maneuver initiates a subtle but potent pressure campaign, aiming to disrupt black's developing harmony and seize initiative. Shifting the rook to e8 prepares for potential central pawn advances and reinforces the kingside defense, aiming for greater piece mobility. Reinforcing the queenside, rc1 prepares a centralized queenside presence and potential pawn advances. Solidifying the center and preparing to challenge white's control of the d-file seems like the primary intention. Asserting central influence, the queen galvanizes pressure on the queenside diagonals and supports potential pawn advances. Solidifying the d-pawn and preparing a kingside pawn push, this knight embarks on a journey to support the central structure. Fortifying the central pawn structure and preparing for potential breakthroughs along the d-file signifies a shift towards proactive central control. Shifting the queen aims to reroute it for a potential kingside attack or to bolster the center, a flexible repositioning. A prudent prophylactic step, preventing potential diagonal infiltration and bolstering the kingside's defensive integrity. Preparing for a queenside expansion, this pawn advances to claim more territory and potentially create dynamic play. Recalibrating the bishop's gaze from a3 to b2 allows for a more natural development and supports the central pawns while maintaining pressure on the queen's flank. Challenging the central pawn structure, black seeks to break the game open and gain initiative on the queenside, creating dynamic counterplay. Opening the center with this pawn exchange aims to exploit the queenside structural weaknesses black has created with their pawn chain. Opening that central pawn chain opens up critical diagonals for both sides' bishops, intensifying the battle for central influence. Clearing the bishop's path unlocks the queenside, but leaves the d4 pawn vulnerable to a discovered attack. This queen repositions to eye the queenside and support a potential pawn push while avoiding the bishop's newfound diagonal. Opening the central files now dramatically alters the pawn structure, demanding immediate tactical attention from black's queen. A critical pawn recapture, opening diagonals and creating a passed pawn dynamic. Launching a knight to attack the queenside pawns opens up lines, aiming to disrupt black's solid structure. Breaching the center with this pawn thrust liberates black's queenside and ignites crucial tactical possibilities. Boldly contesting the open d-file signals white's intent to challenge black's central space. A daring knight leap into the center, aiming to disrupt white's central control and potentially open lines for attack. A bold venture, this knight's sacrifice aims to pry open the queenside and disrupt black's pawn structure. This bishop repositions to eye the weak light squares, reinforcing d5 and preparing for potential queenside action. Unlocking central tension, this maneuver prepares a decisive rook lift. The knight's journey to the fourth rank disrupts white's central control, creating dynamic attacking possibilities. A subtle repositioning, preparing to eye black's central pawn structure and perhaps exploit the queenside overextension. Sacrificing the bishop to disrupt white's pawn structure and seize the initiative on the queenside. Opening this pawn structure offers a pathway to the d-file, potentially creating dynamic possibilities against black's castled king. Unleashing a pawn sacrifice to rip open lines for your queen and bishop on the kingside. Sacrificing the bishop opens lines to the exposed black king. Your king now occupies a surprisingly open sector, a tactical gamble in the face of this unleashed queen's bishop. Unlocking the f-file for white's rook creates immediate attacking potential against the weakened black king position. Repositioning the knight to f6 secures the king's flank and prepares for potential queenside action. Aimed at restricting black's queenside mobility and securing the b2 bishop's diagonal. Reclaiming central squares and preparing to challenge white's queen on the queenside. Unleashing a pawn storm to fracture black's central control, opening diagonals for your pieces. Escaping the knight allows black to reorganize forces, aiming to pressure white's isolated queenside pawns. Targeting the isolated king with a central knight advance. Black embraces the opened kingside by reinforcing the bishop and preparing to challenge the central d-file. Unleashing the passed pawn, this aggressive push ignites the kingside and threatens to disrupt black's entire position. Repositioning the knight to a more active square is a sound idea, aiming to contest white's central initiative. A bold territorial grab, aiming to isolate and torment the enemy knight on b6 while creating a passed pawn. Boldly seeking to disrupt white's pawn structure by challenging the advanced pawn, while potentially creating an outpost on c3. The knight repositions to a more active square, eyeing potential threats against black's weakened kingside. Reactivating the rook on the 7th rank injects much-needed counterplay, aiming to destabilize white's queenside structure. Shifting queen pressure to the queenside pawn structure, this maneuver aims to exploit black's isolated weakness while keeping defensive options open. Sacrificing the rook opens the b-file, creating immediate threats against the white king and offering a dynamic counterplay. Regaining the sacrificed rook opens up the b-file, a crucial corridor for potential queenside activity. Recapturing the rook opens a central file, but surrenders crucial queenside space. Reclaiming the open file is paramount, seeking to dismantle black's active piece play and restore central order. A daring exchange, sacrificing material for initiative and opening up critical lines around white's beleaguered king. A positional retreat, consolidating material gained and opening a clear path for the rook to re-enter the fray. Securing the queen on an open file offers new attacking avenues. This rook re-entry reclaims central influence and targets black's exposed monarch, initiating a promising exchange sequence. Opening the c-file allows black's rook to join the fray, contesting a vital open line. Focusing the queen on the kingside now, preparing to contest the open files and target vulnerable squares. This repositioning allows the queen to activate on the open files, threatening both a5 and potentially creating pressure along the 7th rank. The rook's foray to the 7th rank creates immediate pressure, threatening to sever black's defensive structure. Reasserting pressure on the d-file, this knight retreat aims to disrupt white's control and prepare for potential counterplay. Unleashing the queen's power to disrupt black's rook outpost and reclaim initiative. Exchanging queens simplifies the position significantly, potentially aiming to exploit the open d-file with the rook. Securing the opened file, this capture decisively simplifies toward a winning material advantage. Exposing the king to further potential threats on the open files now. Reasserting control of the central files, and preparing to activate the rook on the 7th rank. The rook's repositioning now aims to secure the 7th rank and disrupt white's connected passed pawns. Reclaiming the d-file, white aims to activate the rook and pressure black's isolated passed pawn. The king now ventures out, seeking active participation as the queens depart the board. Securing the open file, the rook immediately eyes potential breakthroughs against the weakened king position. Rethinking defense across the board offers black a crucial opportunity to consolidate and regroup their shuffled pieces. Asserting dominion over the open c-file, this rook maneuvers to pressure black's isolated pawns and restrict their pieces. The king steps out of the shadows, seeking a safer haven as the queens depart the board. Pouncing on the open queen side, white aims to exploit the vulnerable black king. Relocating the king shields it from the open file and prepares for potential pawn breakthroughs. Consolidating the king towards the center is a sensible endgame priority. Initiating pawn breaks on the queen side to awaken trapped pieces. Repositioning the king to the king's side offers increased safety and prepares for potential pawn pushes. Preparing to contest the open file and activate the rook on the queen side. The rook slides over to the open c-file, ready to contest control and harass black's isolated pawn. Liberating the trapped knight opens a vital diagonal for the black king to find safety amidst the chaos. Opening the b-file creates immediate pressure on black's weakened king side, forcing concessions. Reactivating the knight offers a chance to disrupt white's imposing pawn chain and potentially create counterplay on the queen side. Unleashing a decisive check, white forces a favorable endgame exchange, aiming to exploit black's exposed king. Relocating the monarch to the active central files offers a chance to regroup and potentially rally. The knight's exchange opens a clear path for your king to become an active player. The king steps out, seeking safety after the pawn exchange, but the open d-file still poses significant danger. This capture of the rook simplifies the position dramatically, leaving white with a material advantage and a clear path to victory. Exploring the newly opened rook file after the exchange, the black king feels a chill as white's monarch becomes a potential target. Shifting the rook to the 7th offers excellent protection to your queen, a crucial defensive posture in this endgame. Bringing the rook into the action creates immediate threats, seeking to disrupt white's king and pawn structure. Securing the king's safety is paramount in this unfolding endgame scenario. Unleashing the pawn's potential offers a dynamic way to disrupt white's advanced king. Grabbing that pawn forces black's king into a much more exposed position on the king side. Unleashing the king from its cramped post-game position into the thick of the action. Securing the rook on the 6th rank, white initiates a determined endgame push, aiming to exploit black's exposed king. The rook aims to infiltrate the opponent's territory, seeking open lines for swift action. The rook's repositioning aims to exploit the open file and create threats against the lone knight on the queen side. Confronting the advanced rook on the 2nd rank now creates significant king exposure. The pawn pushes forward, threatening to march unimpeded to the promotion square and secure a decisive advantage. Hoping to exploit the weakened king by forcing open the file and bringing the rook into the attack. Securing the monarch from further checks, the king now ventures toward the center, preparing for the final endgame skirmishes. Sacrificing tempo with this check only delays the inevitable material loss and simplifies white's path to victory. Securing the king's safety becomes paramount after the pawn push. The rook's journey to a3 aims to disrupt white's passed pawn by forcing a capture, though it might open lines prematurely. Unleashing a pawn's final charge toward queenside promotion. Sensing the impending checkmate on the king's side, Black attempts a desperate gambit by sacrificing a pawn to activate his monarch and escape the mating net. Pawn advances like this in the endgame can secure a passed pawn or expose weaknesses. Here, it seems to be about creating space for the king. This audacious check aims to disrupt the white king's safe harbor and potentially create new pathways for the rook. Securing the king's escape route while maintaining pressure on the rook demonstrates astute endgame technique. Grasping the final pawn and preparing for the king's potential activity. Initiating a pawn storm on the king's side to create new attacking avenues for the white king. A desperate king check, momentarily disrupting the inevitable pawn march towards promotion. Securing the king's escape route while eyeing the vulnerable pawns is a key defensive posture. A bold attempt to disrupt white's attacking formation and seize a crucial outpost on the 7th rank. The king boldly advances, a final attempt to solidify the pawn structure and create past threats before the endgame truly solidifies. Seeking to draw the king out, Black checks, hoping to exploit the weakened dark squares. Securing the king's sanctuary with this advance is paramount. Resigning to the inevitable cascade of pawns after accepting the king's excursion, Black seeks a forlorn hope in activating their rook. The king steps forward, seeking active participation as the passed pawn advances.